Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav, and we will be learning today Mirz Hashem Daf Kuf Dalid Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchas Sukkah, and we are holding in the midst of Siman Taf Reish Lamed Tes. We pick up today on the very bottom line of Kuf Dalid Amid Aleph at the end really of Sif Beis. It's really just a question of housekeeping. I incidentally left out the last sentence of the Ramah on Kuf Daled Amud Aleph here in Sif Beis. If you remember, we had been speaking about sleeping in the Sukkah. The Ramah wondered why it is that people seem to be very makel when it comes to the question of sleeping in the Sukkah. Only those that are really medaktik in b'mitzvahs seem to sleep in the Sukkah. The Ramah gave out the possibility, maybe it's mishum tzina, maybe it's because of cold. He also spoke about the possibility it could be that there's a p'tur from Sukkah if you don't have a private Sukkah and you don't have the ability to sleep in the Sukkah together with your wife, because that would be chesaron of teishvu ke'ein taduru. In your house, you sleep together with your wife. If in the Sukkah you cannot, then you have a p'tur, because that wouldn't be teishvu ke'ein taduru. We brought down in the Mishnah Berurah, the Magen Avram and the Gra took exception to that. The Magen Avram said perhaps the p'tur is one of mitzvah. If you can't be together with your wife, that would be mitzvah. Now we come to the last sentence of this Ramah, the bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch on Kuf Daled Amud Aleph, where the Ramah says, "V'toiv lahachmir." It would be good to be stringent, v'lihiyos sham im ishtai, and to taka be in the Sukkah together with your wife, k'may shehudar kal hashana, in the way that you live in your house throughout the year. Im efsher lihiyos loy sukkah miyuchedes, but obviously this only applies in a situation where it would be appropriate. It has to be a private sukkah. It has to be appropriate for a husband to be together with his wife. Baruch Hashem, we seem to live in a time, a day and age of ashirus, and now there are people, I actually know several people who built houses, and they built a small porch off of the master bedroom, and they did it specifically for this reason. They made a small porch off the master bedroom, and they make a little sukkah just for the husband and the wife, and they taka sleep together in the sukkah. Okay, now we're on Kuf Daled Amud Beis, and we turn to Siv Gimel. Says the Mechaber, Achila b'sukkah b'leil Yom Tov harishain chayva. Eating in the sukkah on the very first night of Sukkot is a mitzvah chiyuvis. It's obligatory. You must eat in the sukkah on the first night of Sukkot. Says the Mechaber, Afilu achal kezayis pas, even if you only eat a kezayis of pas, of bread, yatsa yedei chayvasai, you fulfill the mitzvah chiyuvis to eat in the sukkah on the first night of Sukkot. Now, that happens to be very interesting, and we'll discuss it in the Mishnah Berurah, because let's remember, the shiur kezayis, the volume of an aleph, is certainly a shiur that's very, very familiar to us in halacha. Many halachas go by the shiur of kezayis. However, here in Hilchas Sukkah, we really have been discussing a different shiur, and that is yoser ma'at yoser mikebetza. We have been saying that when are you mechuyev to eat food in a sukkah? So if you're eating pas, anything less than the volume of an egg, if it's a minute amount less than a kibetza, then that's considered an achilas arai, and since it's an achilas arai, you're not mechuyev to eat it in a sukkah. When are you mechuyev to eat pas in a sukkah? If you eat ma'at yoser mikibetza, if you eat even a tiny amount larger, more than the volume of an egg of pas, then you're mechuyev to eat in a sukkah. Now, a kezayis, the volume of an olive, is less than a kibetza. So it comes out that what the Mechaber is telling me here is, you have a mitzvah chiyuvis, you're obligated to eat in the sukkah the first night of Sukkot. How much are you mechuyev to eat? You're mechuyev to eat a kezayis of pas. Once you eat a kezayis of pas, you are yoytze the mitzvah. Now, what's interesting about that is, you're not even mechuyev to eat a kezayis of pas in the sukkah. If all you want to eat is a kezayis of pas, you could eat it outside of the sukkah. Kezayis is less than a kibetza. So it comes out that you're yoitza the mitzvah of sukkah by eating an amount that you're not even mechuyev to eat in the sukkah. Now, that's a very, very interesting thing, and we'll discuss that in the Mishnah Berurah. But let's first turn to Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Yotes. I just wanted to speak that out because it seems to be such an obvious oddity. Says the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Yotes, Belel Yom Tov Harishon Chayva. On the first night of Sukkot, there's an obligation, there's a mitzvah chiyuvis to eat in the sukkah. Says the Chavetz Chaim Ritzayin Loymar, what the Mechaber wants to say here is, the Belel Yom Tov Harishon Mechuyev Lechol B'Sukkah. On the first night of Sukkot, you have a mitzvah chiyuvis. You're obligated to eat in the sukkah. Va'afilu im einoi oichel ela kezayis. And that's true, even if you're only going to eat a kezayis of pas. Ma she'ein kein milel zeh v'hola. But every other night, afilu b'Shabbos v'Yom Tov, the mechuyev lechol pas. You see, the Chavetz Chaim, and we're going to see he's coming off of a ran. The Chavetz Chaim is coming to address a question over here. The Mechaber is clearly telling us that the first night of Sukkot is different than the rest of Sukkot. On the first night of Sukkot, you have a mitzvah chiyuvis to eat in the sukkah. You're obligated. You must eat in the sukkah. The implication is that the rest of Yom Tov, you do not have to eat in the sukkah. And the Mechaber is going to spell that out. If you want to have a Suda, so you have to have a Suda in the sukkah. What if you don't want to have a Suda? What if you want to, you're vegan and you want to eat fruits and vegetables and nuts for the rest of Yom Tov? All of those are foods that are not mechuyev in sukkah. So if you want, you do not have to eat in the sukkah for the rest of Yom Tov. The first night you must eat. Now there's a problem with that. The problem with that is that besides the first night of Sukkah, you also have other Yom Tov meals, and you also have Shabbos meals. In normal cases, well, you're zichah going to have Shabbos meals. Even if the first day of Yom Tov is Shabbos, you're going to have the Shabbos day meal. So you're going to have Shabbos meals, and you're going to have Yom Tov meals. Now, on Shabbos and Yom Tov, you're mechuyev to have a Suda. So if you're mechuyev to have a Suda, once again, you're mechuyev to eat in the Sukkah. So what does the Mechaber mean? What's different between the first night of Sukkot and all the other days of Sukkot? There's not a clear difference. The first night you have a chiyuv to eat in the Sukkah, but the other Yom Tov meals and the other Shabbos meals, you're also mechuyev to eat in the Sukkah. So the Ran that the Mishnah Berurah is bringing down over here is answering that question. So he's saying like this: Leil Yom Tov Harishon mechuyev lechol b'Sukkah. The first night of Sukkot, you have a mitzvah chiyuvis to eat in the sukkah. You're obligated to eat in the sukkah. And what's different about the first night is, the first night you have a chiyuv to eat in the sukkah, even if you only eat a kezayis of pas. Masha ein kain milel zevahala. Now, what's different about that than the rest of Yom Tov is, after the first night and on, afilu b'Shabbos v'Yom Tov de mechuyev lechol pas, even on the other Yom Tov meals and the Shabbos meals, when you taka have a chiyuv to eat pas, you still could avoid eating in the sukkah. Because ein mechuyev lechol b'sukkah, you don't have a chiyuv to eat in the sukkah, ela im oichel yoser mikabetza, to have yachilas kva. The other Yom Tov meals and the other Shabbos meals, you still don't have to eat in the sukkah. Just eat a kezayis. Wash, make kiddush, wash, have a kezayis of pas. Kezayis, you're not mechuyev to eat in the sukkah. You're only mechuyev to eat in the sukkah if it's yoser mikabetza. It's not going to be yoser mikabetza. You don't have to eat in the sukkah. But on the first night, you're mechuyev to eat in the sukkah, even if you're only going to eat a kezayis. So let's see, continue the Mishnah Berurah. V'atam delayla zeh chamir. Why is the first night more chamor? Why is it that the first night you're mechuyev to eat in the sukkah, and you're mechuyev even to eat a kezayis in the sukkah? Normally you're only mechuyev to eat ma'at yosem mikabetza. The first night you're even mechuyev to eat a kezayis. Why? The Gamrinan chamisha asar mechag hamatzos. Because we learn out Gzera Shava Tezvav. It says Chamisha Asar by Pesach. It says Chamisha Asar by Sukkot. the 15th day of the month. That's when the Yom Tov begins. So we have this Gzera Shava Chamisha Asar that compares Pesach to Sukkot. Ma Hasam Rak Laila Harishayna Chayva. Just like on Pesach, we learn out that you only have a chiyuv to eat matzah on the first night of Pesach, and mikan ve'elech rishus, and the rest of Pesach, if you want to wash, you eat matzah. If you don't want to wash, you don't eat matzah. Af hachanami linyan sukkah. So too by sukkah, the first night is a chiyuv, and the rest is only optional. Now let's go right into his chaf kezayis. Even if you're only going to eat a kezayis of pas, you have to eat in the sukkah, and you're yoytze the mitzvah of sukkah. And again, we just said, and again, the Mishnah Berurah with this is coming off of the Ran, where the Ran is saying, what's the key difference between the first night and all the other sukkahs meals, even the Yom Tov and Shabbos meals of sukkahs? The key difference is that on the first night, you cannot get out of eating in the sukkah. You have to eat at least a kezayis of pas in the sukkah. Kezayis. I'm not even mechuyev to eat a kezayis in the sukkah. The first night you are. The rest of Yom Tov, you're only mechuyev to eat in the sukkah if you eat mat yosem mikabetza. And you don't have to eat mat yosem mikabetza. You have a Yom Tov meal, you have a Shabbos meal, eat a kezayis. Eat a kezayis of pas. You're not mechuyev to eat in the sukkah. Eat your kezayis of pas outside the sukkah. Now comes the Mishnah Berurah, and he says, kezayis, like I spoke out earlier, kezayis, you're going to be yoytze the mitzvah of sukkah by eating a kezayis of pas in the sukkah. You're not even mechuyev normally to eat a kezayis of pas in the sukkah. So now the Mishnah Berurah again is going to say that the first night of Yom Tov, you're mechuyev even to eat a kezayis. The rule of ma'at yoser mikabetza does not apply on the first night of Yom Tov. The first night of Yom Tov, you're even mechuyev to eat a kezayis in the sukkah, and you're yoytze the mitzvah of sukkah with that kezayis. Explains the Mishnah Berurah, where does this come from? Because the Chavetz Chaim says, what did I just tell you? I just told you that we learn Gzera Shava Tesvav from Pesach. That's how we know that the first night is different than all the other nights, because Tesvav from Pesach. By Pesach, there's a mitzvah chiyuv to eat matzah only on the first night. The rest of Yom Tov is optional to eat matzah. So too on Sukkot, the mitzvah of eating in the Sukkah is only a mitzvah chiyuv on the first night. The rest of Sukkot is optional. Now, the Chavetz Chaim says, once we make that Gzera Shava Tesvav, it gets extended to other halachas as well. The Kevin, the Gamrin on Mechagamatzis, once we're learning out this Gzera Shava from Pesach, Legamri Gamrin on Minei. We don't only learn it out to pull over one detail from Pesach. We don't only pull over the detail that the first night is different than the rest of Yom Tov. We pull out other halachas as well. Namely, Ma Hasam B'Kezayis Dagon, just like by Pesach, where you have a mitzvah of achilas matzah. You could be yoytze your mitzvah of achilas matzah with a kezayis of grain-based matzah. Avhacha b'kezayis dagon. So too over here, to be yoytze the mitzvah of sukkah, you could be yoytze the mitzvah of sukkah with a kezayis of dagon. Now, we're going to go further discussion of this concept of the kezayis versus the ma'at yoser mikabetza. We're going to discuss that more in Ois Cotton Chav Beis, but first let's see Ois Cotton Chav Aleph. The Mechaber said, in order to be yoytze the mitzvah, you have a chiyuv to eat a kezayis of pas. Says the Mishnah Berurah here, Ois Cotton Chav Aleph, pas, bread, v'loi mine targima. You cannot be yoytze the mitzvah of sukkah with mine targima. Mine targima are delicacies, sweets and delicacies. You can't be yoytze the mitzvah that way. You might go out and buy some very expensive nash, some very expensive, very tasty foods and delicacies, but you're not yoytze the mitzvah of sukkah that way. And the Chavetz Chaim says the reason that's true is the sveika da'araisahu, because it's a suffix da'araisa. What suffix da'araisa is he referring to? He's referring to an ibaya d'lo ivshita in the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi discusses this question, whether or not you could be Yaitza with Mini Targima, and the Yerushalmi leaves it unresolved. It's an Ibaya Deloy Ifshita. Since it's an Ibaya Deloy Ifshita, a question that is not brought to a conclusion, it's not decided, therefore, it's a Safek Daraisa. The mitzvah Saseh of Achila Sukkah is a Daraisa. By Daraisa, we have to go to Chumrah, and therefore you need Pas. Vegam loy pas kisnin. Mishnah Berurah says you also cannot be Yaitza on the first night using pas kisnin, danishes, cakes, knishes. You can't be Yaitza with pas kisnin. Ella pas gomor. Rather, you need pas gomor. Ois katnachav beis. Yotza yedei chayvasai. So you eat a kezayis of pas, you Yaitza the chiv of sukkah. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Like we've been saying, even though the rest of Yom Tov you're not even mechuyev to eat a kezayis in the sukkah, because the shiur of chiv sukkah is ma'at yosef b'kabeitza, slightly more than the volume of an egg, right? So kezayis is less than that, and the rest of Yom Tov you're not even mechuyev to eat it in the sukkah. Avalel rishon shehu chayva tvei, but on the first night, where you have a much more powerful chiv to eat in the sukkah, because Gzeru Shavah Tezvav, and it's a mitzvah chiyuvis daraisa. Afilu loy boil meichal el kezayis. On the first night, even if you intend to only eat a kezayis, you're not going to eat a kibetza. You're only going to eat a kezayis. Aser la'achloi chutzala. You're not allowed to eat a kezayis outside the sukkah on the first night of sukkahs. So somebody asks you, what's the shiur of pas, of chiyuv to eat in the sukkah? Well, what do you mean, Mat Yosef Mikabetza? No, depends. The first night of Yom Tov, the chiyuv is a kezayis. First night of Yom Tov, you're not allowed to eat even a kezayis of pas outside the sukkah. The rest of Yom Tov, you're allowed to eat slightly less than a kibetza outside the sukkah. But the first night, a kezayis, you're mechuyev to eat it in the sukkah. Hilkach, and therefore, once there's a chiyuv to eat the amount, the volume of a kezayis in the sukkah, yoytza banami yedei sukkah. So we started off with this question: how could you tell me that you yoytza the chiyuv of eating the sukkah by eating an amount that you're not even chayiv to eat in the sukkah? The answer is that there's a very strong difference. It's not true. On the first night of Yom Tov, a kezayis, you're mechuyev to eat it in the sukkah. Once you're mechuyev to eat it in the sukkah, you could be yoytza the mitzvah of sukkah. Why are you chayiv to eat the volume of a kezayis in the sukkah on the first night? Because it's a bigger chiyuv. Why is it a bigger chiyuv? Gzeru Shavah Tezvav from matzah on Pesach. V'tzarich levarach leishev b'sukkah al zeh. And even if you're only going to eat a kezayis, you're going to make a leishev, because it's a bona fide chiyuv daraisa to eat that kezayis in the sukkah. However, the Mishnah Berurah, the Chavetz Chaim, does qualify this a little bit, and he brings down, and he doesn't, in the Shari Tzion, his Kat Men Vav, he doesn't even bring it down from anybody. He says it's pashut, what he's about to say. It's obvious. V'hainu kishe'en lo yoser. This whole sprach of only eating a kezayis and being yoytze the mitzvah of sukkah by eating a kezayis of pas, that's only true if you don't have more than that. You're stuck. You only have a kezayis. Avalim yeshloi, but if you have more than a kezayis, bevadai min anocha in sheyochel yoyse mikabetza, certainly, if you have the ability to, you should eat more than a kibetza. Lotzeis kamdas hasoivrim, so that you should fulfill the mitzvah according to those opinions. And again, this is from Iran. Hasoivrim, who hold the lotzeis yidei mitzvah say beinan sheyochel shiur hamachayev lechem b'sukkah kol shiva. There are those that say that in order to be yoytze the mitzvah, you have to eat an amount that you're mechuyev to eat in the sukkah, the entire sukkahs, not only the first night. So if you have a kibetza, eat a kibetza. Dainu yoyse mikabetza, a little more than a kibetza. Kasva achronim, the achronim also write, we know that whenever we talk about a mitzvah of achila, or an iser of achila, let's say when we talk about the mitzvah of achilas matzah, you want to be yoytze the mitzvah say of achilas matzah, you have to eat a kezayis. But not only do you have to eat a kezayis, you have to eat that kezayis within a certain amount of time. You have to eat that kezayis within the time span of kedei achilas pras, the amount of time it takes to eat a half a loaf from the Mishnaic times. That's Kedei Achilas Pras, which we always say is somewhere between 3 minutes and 9 minutes. We try to go l'chumra as much as possible when it comes to a daraisa. So I tell people, eat your matzah, all the measurements that people make. You don't have the measurements, eat matzah for 3 minutes. If you ate matzah for 3 minutes, so you ate a kazayis. Because you ate already a Kedei Achilas Pras. More than that, you're already outside of the Kedei Achilas Pras. Okay, you can eat a little bit longer if you can't eat that fast. So you could be yotze the mitzvah according to other shittas with more than 3 minutes. You have from 3 to 9 minutes. But that's Kedei Achilas Pras. What's the explanation of this time frame? The explanation is that when you eat for longer than a Kedei Achilas Pras, your act of eating is no longer considered one act of eating. Think about it. When you do a maisa of eating, how long is that considered one act of eating? I mean, somebody sits down to eat, and he goes, he takes something off his plate, he eats it, then he schmoozes for 5 minutes, takes another piece off his plate, eats it, then he schmoozes for another 5 minutes, and he takes another piece off his plate, and he eats it. Is that all one act of eating? No, it's 3 acts of eating. So at what point does eating become divided up into separate acts? The answer in halacha is the shiur of Kedei Achilas Pras. Whatever you eat within the time frame of Kedei Achilas Pras, that's one act of eating. Once your eating goes beyond Kedei Achilas Pras, it's already more than one act of eating. And you have to be yotze the mitzvah, you have to eat a shiur in one act of eating. If you eat a half a kazayis b'Kedei Achilas Pras and a half a kazayis beyond Kedei Achilas Pras, so then you didn't eat a kazayis at one shot, you ate a half a kazayis, and then you ate another half a kazayis. You're not yotze the mitzvah with a half a kazayis and a half a kazayis. You have to be yotze the mitzvah with a whole kazayis. Here too, the Achrayim say, Kasva Achrayim, you have a mitzvah say to eat in the Sukkah. And to be yotze your chiyuv, you have to eat a kazayis pas in the Sukkah. So the Achrayim say, the be'inon shelo yishav achilasai hakazayis yotze mechdei achilas pras. The Achrayim say that when you sit down in the Sukkah, the first night of Sukkot, and you wash, and you take your challah, and you want to be yotze now, the mitzvah of eating in the Sukkah, you should make sure to eat a kazayis of pas, b'chdei achilas pras. I think this is something that escapes most people. Pesach night, everybody is so careful. They take the matzah, and they go, and they measure a kazayis, and they look at the clock, and they make sure that they eat it, b'chdei achilas pras. People don't tend to look at Sukkot so much as a mitzvah of achila. It's a mitzvah yeshiva sukkah. So what do you mean? I'm eating a meal in the sukkah. Yeah, but what happens, and with young adults and children maybe you don't have to worry so much about, but young adults even, dare I say, especially very weight-sensitive young ladies, so they say, okay, women aren't chayiv in sukkah, so where am I going with that? Okay, let's cast that aside. Forget that I said that. I guess we have to be very fair nowadays. We got to deal with equality. So very weight-sensitive young men. So they sit down and they wash. Or you have people who don't particularly like challah. I have some kids that don't like challah. They sit down, they wash, they take a piece of challah. Now they spend the next hour and a half having a beautiful Yom Tov Suda in the sukkah. But what are they eating? They're eating fish. Okay, they're eating fish. Yeah, we saw chumrah that if you eat fish in an oifen of kvius, you should eat it in the sukkah. But you're not yotze the mitzvah by eating fish in the sukkah. So they have fish, not yotze the mitzvah. Soup, not yotze the mitzvah. Prime rib, not yotze the mitzvah. Potato kugel, not yotze the mitzvah. Chocolate mousse, not yotze the mitzvah. When were they yotze the mitzvah? They yotze the mitzvah with the challah. But what if they never ate a kazayis of challah in Kedei Achilas Pras? They weren't yotze the mitzvah. So you got to take a piece of challah and make sure to eat a kazayis of challah b'chdei achilas pras to be yotze the mitzvah chiyuvis on the first night of Sukkot to eat in the sukkah. Okay, I didn't even realize when I prepared the shiur that this is something that you really have to point out. I'm afraid that there are a lot of people who miss this point, that they don't chop this point. Okay. Now, I just want to bring your attention to a biur halacha. Biur halacha dibra maschil b'leil Yom Tov harishon chayva. So we had the Mishnah Berurah over here, and I told you that the Mishnah Berurah was coming from the Ran. where the Mechaber is showing us this difference between the first night of Sukkot and the rest of Yom Tov. And what the Mechaber and the Mishnah Berurah explained, what's the difference? What do you mean that you're not chayiv to eat in the Sukkah the rest of Yom Tov? Yes, you are. On the Yom Tov days, and by the Yom Tov Sudas, and by the Shabbos Sudas, you're mechuyev to eat challah, you're mechuyev to wash, you're mechuyev to eat challah. Once you're going to eat challah, you have a chiyuv to eat in the Sukkah. So on those days, you also have a chiyuv to eat in the Sukkah. So what do you mean you only have a chiyuv on the first night? No, it's not true. You have a chiyuv at that time also. So the Mishnah Berurah came from the Ran, and the Mishnah Berurah said, no, there is a very big difference. The difference is that even by the other Yom Tov meals and the other Shabbos meals, you could get away with not eating in the Sukkah. How? Don't eat more than a beitzah. Eat a kezayis, but don't eat a kibetza. The rest of Yom Tov, we said, you're not mechuyev to eat in the Sukkah. Really, strictly speaking, if you're going to eat pachos mikibetza, that's an achilas arai, so you'll eat it out of the Sukkah. That's the way the Ran kriegt out of this question, and that's what the Mishnah Berurah brought down in the Mishnah Berurah. Now take a look at this Biur Halacha. The Chavetz Chaim says, Ayin Mishnah Berurah, take a look at the Mishnah Berurah, what I wrote. V'hu mer Ran, and I'm coming off of the Ran. And the reason the Ran says this, says the Chavetz Chaim, ukedei liyashev mashe tamu kol hapaiskim. The Ran writes this in order to solve the barm kasha that all the paiskim ask. That what do you mean the first night is different? The haloi gam b'Shabbos v'Yom Tov chayv alechel pas. On the Shabbos Sudas and the Yom Tov Sudas, you also have a chiyuv to eat pas. Umemela, and once you have a chiyuv to eat pas, memela it comes out mitzvah min HaTorah lechel b'Sukkah. That you're going to have a mitzvah say midaraisa to eat in the Sukkah because you got to eat pas. So you got to eat pas, you got to eat in the Sukkah. So what do you mean? Umay revusa deleil zeh. So in what way is the first night of Sukkot better, stronger, more chamer than the rest of Yom Tov? And therefore the Ran came with this knech, that the difference is kezayis versus kibetza. The first night, you're even chayiv with a kezayis. So you can eat a kezayis, you got to eat in the Sukkah. The rest of Yom Tov, you'll eat less than a kibetza, so you can eat it out of the Sukkah. Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'la'aniyas daiti, in my humble opinion, that's what the Chavetz Chaim says. We don't look at the Chavetz Chaim's opinion as being humble. But the Chavetz Chaim says, V'la'aniyas daiti, my humble opinion, especially the Chavetz Chaim is talking in the face of Rishonim. This is a Ran that he came from. So says the Chavetz Chaim, V'la'aniyas daiti, lo ovin kush yezu. I don't even understand the kasha. The Chavetz Chaim says the whole kasha doesn't start to me. The nafkamina, because there's another nafkamina. I could show you another way that there's a difference between the first night of Sukkot and the rest of Sukkot. Lahad the isa la'el b'siman reish peiches. If we go back to Hilchas Shabbos, to Siman reish peiches, if Aleph, we learned halacha, the adam harogil his anais b'chol yom. Somebody who fasts all the time. This is a guy who lives, he's shari b'tainus. V'achila b'Shabbos utzar loy. I don't know, I'm not sure what kind of person we're talking about here. It sounds like we're talking about a borderline anorexic. But v'achila b'Shabbos utzar loy. Eating on Shabbos is tsar. It's a tsar for him to eat on Shabbos. Potem elechel. So as far as Hilchas Shabbos is concerned, we learned in Siman reish peiches, if eating is a tsar for somebody, then he's potter. He doesn't have to eat on Shabbos. He's not mechuyev to eat on Shabbos. Why? Because the whole point of Suda Shabbos is Oynig Shabbos, v'karos ala Shabbos Oynig. That's the whole point of Suda Shabbos. So la'Oynig nitain v'lo l'tzar. The halacha was given, the chiyuv was given for Oynig, for enjoyment, not for tzar. So memela you could get, there is a case where there is no chiyuv to eat a Shabbos Suda. And there is no chiyuv to eat a Yom Tov Suda. So says the Chavetz Chaim, you want to know how you can have a case where on Sukkot the first night is different than any other night? I'll tell you a case. A person who has a p'tur from eating Suda Shabbos and Sudas Yom Tov, because Suda Shabbos and Sudas Yom Tov is not an oinik for him, it's a tsar, so he's not going to eat Sudas Yom Tov and Suda Shabbos. Masha ein kebel el rishon shel Sukkos, but that will not exempt him from the first night of Sukkot. Because on the first night of Sukkot, the achila gufa hu mitzvah saseh kishar mitzvah saseh. On the first night of Sukkot, eating is a mitzvah saseh like putting on tefillin. Nothing to do with oinik. It's a mitzvah saseh daraisa. You got to eat. You have a mitzvah saseh with daraisa to put on tefillin. You also have a mitzvah seder deraisa to eat in the sukkah on the first night of Sukkot. V'lo mishum einig nitain. That wasn't given for einig. So the Chofetz Chaim says this bomb kasha. What does it mean that there's a difference between the first night and the other night and the other days of Yom Tov? How about Shabbos and Yom Tov where you're mechuyev to eat? Says the Chofetz Chaim, I have a very simple resolution. The nafkamina is when there is no mechuyev to eat a Shabbos Suda or a Yom Tov Suda. Because that is not a strict mitzvah say daraisa that you must eat. There's an exemption. Somebody for whom it's a tsar to eat is not mechuyev to eat. But even the person for whom it's a tsar to eat, so he's exempt from Suda Shabbos and Suda's Yom Tov, he's not exempt from the mitzvah say daraisa of eating a kazayis pas in the sukkah on the first night of Sukkot, and that's how that night is different than the rest of Yom Tov. Okay, now let's go back to the Shulchan Aruch. So for continuity's sake, I'm just going to read the words from the beginning of Siv Gimel. Achila b'sukkah b'leil Yom Tov rishon chayva. Eating in the sukkah on the first night of Yom Tov is a mitzvah chiyuvis, it's obligatory. Afilu achal kezayis pas yotze yidei chayvasai. And your yotze yechiv of eating of the sukkah, even with just a kezayis of pas, and the Mishnah Berurah said that's only if you don't have more. Certainly if you have more, you should eat ma'at yotze mikabetza. Mikan ve'elech rishus. For the rest of Yom Tov, eating in the sukkah is optional. Ratza lechol suda. If you want to eat a suda, sayed b'sukkah. You'll eat in the sukkah. Ratza, if you want, eini oichel kol shiva, elaperos ukloyos, elaperos ukloyos. If you want, for the rest of Yom Tov, you'll eat fruit and you'll eat nuts, and you'll eat chutz l'sukkah oichel, and you'll eat outside of the sukkah. Kedin achilas matzah b'Pesach. Just like the halacha of achilas matzah on Pesach, because that's where we learn this from. Gzerah Shabbat Tesvav. So the same way on Pesach, the first night of the mitzvah chiyuvis to eat matzah. The rest of Yom Tov, if you want to wash, you'll eat matzah. If you don't want to wash, you won't. So too on Sukkot. If the rest of the first night, you must eat a kazayis pas in the sukkah. The rest of Yom Tov, you want to be kaveh suda, you'll go out to the sukkah, you'll be kaveh suda in the sukkah. You don't want to be kaveh suda, fine, you'll eat in the house. You won't be kaveh suda. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Mechaber said over here, Kol Shiva. He contrasted the first night to the rest of the 7 days of Yom Tov. Says the Mechaber, Hainu b'chol hamoed. Let's realize what he means. He means to contrast to Chol hamoed. When the Mechaber says that for the rest of Yom Tov, if you want to make a Suda, you'll make a Suda, and if you don't want to make a Suda, you'll eat fruits and nuts, he's referring to Chol hamoed. Aval b'Shabbos the Yom Tov tzarich lechal kezayis pas. You still do have to make a suda on by the other Yom Tov sudas and the other Shabbos sudas. But then you can eat a kezayis, achloi boy sukkah, and therefore you still don't need a sukkah, like we spoke out. You'll wash and you'll eat a kezayis. A kezayis is less than a kibetza. Since it's less than a kibetza and it's not the first night of Sukkot, you're not mechuyev to eat in the sukkah. V'after b'siman reish tzadik aleph kasav amagen avram de l'suda Shabbos tzarch gam kein kibetza v'yoser kedei de lehev sudas kva. Even though we had a Magen Avram in Siman reish tzadik aleph who says that to be yoser suda Shabbos you have to eat more than a kibetza. So how are we saying over here that you'll be yoser suda Shabbos with a kezayis? So the Chofetz Chaim explains. Hasam mitzvah ba'alma lechatchila. When the Magen Avram says that, that's lechatchila. That's the mitzvah. It's a mitzvah that for einig purposes you should eat at least a kibetza. But ubediyeved die b'kezayis. But b'diyeved you could be yaitza with a kezayis. So again, in the Mechaber contrasts the first night to the other 7 days of Sukkot, and he says on the other 7 days of Sukkot you could eat fruits and nuts. That's lav dafka. That's not 100% precise. He means on Chol hamoed you could get away with fruits and nuts. For the Yom Tov Sudas and the Shabbos Sudas, you're going to have to wash. But you still don't need a sukkah, because b'di'eved you could wash and you could eat a kezayis of pas. And b'di'eved you're yoytze Sudas Shabbos and Sudas Yom Tov with a kezayis. You don't need a kibetza. And a kezayis you're not mechuyev to eat in the sukkah. In this way, the halacha of eating in the sukkah and the halacha of eating matzah and Pesach are the same. Matzah, the first night, you mechuyev to eat matzah. The rest of Yom Tov, optional. You wash, you eat matzah. You don't wash, you don't have to eat matzah. So too, Sukkot. Now, here's a very interesting Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nistapakti. I have this nistapakti. I have a suffix. What's the suffix? Very, very hard to understand. Lefim mashi yedua das hagra. According to the well-known opinion of the Gra, the mitzvah lechol matzah kol shivas yimei Pesach. The Gra says there is a mitzvah to eat matzah all of the other days of Pesach. What does that mean? What the Gra says is, it's true. You have a mitzvah chiyuvis to eat matzah on the first night of Pesach. The rest of Pesach, no, you want to wash, you'll eat matzah. You don't want to wash, you won't eat matzah. You don't have to eat a single matzah the rest of Pesach. That's it. You can't. You don't like matzah. You can't bear the thought of eating matzah. So you'll be yotzei the mitzvah with matzah by the Seder night. The rest of Yom Tov, you don't got to see another matzah. You don't have to eat any matzah. But the Gra says, if you do eat matzah the rest of Pesach, every time you eat matzah, you're getting a mitzvah. You're being mekayim a mitzvah every time you eat matzah the rest of Pesach. But that's a mitzvah kiyumis. It's not a mitzvah chiyuvis. A mitzvah chiyuvis is obligatory. A mitzvah kiyumis is you do it, you're mekayim a mitzvah. You don't do it, you're not mekayim a mitzvah. Shiluach hakein is not a mitzvah chiyuvis. You don't have a chiyuv to go search out a bird nest and go be mekayim the mitzvah of shiluach hakein. It's a mitzvah kiyumis. You chance upon the bird nest and you can be yotzei the mitzvah of shiluach hakein. So gesundheit, you were yotzei the mitzvah. Incidentally, whenever I bring up mitzvah chiyuvis and mitzvah kiyumis, I always like to mention, because to a lot of people it's a staggering chiddush. You should know that Rav Moshe Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh Livracha writes in a tshuva, not in a shiur. This is not in Dibris Moshe, so you'll say maybe it's a little bit, maybe more theoretical. No, this is in Igris Moshe in a tshuva. It's not. I'm sorry, it's not in the Igris. It wasn't printed in the Igris. We printed it in the yeshiva in the Sefer HaZikaron, but it was a written tshuva that he responded to a shayil, just as the rest of Igris Moshe. It's a 14-page tshuva explaining what the chiyuv of Talmud Torah is. What is the chiyuv to learn Torah? And you know what the Rishiva Zatzal says in that tshuva? The Rishiva Zatzal says that's a mitzvah chiyuvis. I'll call echad ve'echad. There is a mitzvah chiyuvis, an obligatory mitzvah on everybody, lilmoid, to learn kol HaTorah kula. How do you like them potatoes? There's a mitzvah chiyuvis to put on tefillin every day. You have a chiyuv to put on tefillin every day. There's a mitzvah chiyuvis to lilmoid kol HaTorah kula. There's an obligatory mitzvah to learn kol HaTorah kula. Now, I gave you 10 seconds for that to settle into your mind, and now you're sitting here and you say, whoa, hold it, Rabbi Weiss. Mitzvah chiyuvis lilmoid kol HaTorah kula, and you're telling this to me right before Rosh Hashanah? That's it. I'm miyayish. I give up right now. I can't. I'm not shaykh. So take a deep breath. Rav Moshe says, what does it mean to learn kol HaTorah kula? So he says, look, Yom Sedra. So you go through Chamisha Chumshei Torah, you come to shul, you hear laning, you follow the kriya. So you learned Torah Shebiksav. You learned the ikr of Torah Shebiksav. You learned Chamisha Chumshei Torah. I think in the tshuva he does make mention of Nach as well. I think he does. But Chamisha Chumshei Torah, so you have Chamisha Chumshei Torah. Okay. Talmud Bavli. You learn Daf Yomi? Rabbi said, learn Daf Yomi. You learn Daf Yomi? Fine, you're learning Shas. Says Rav Moshe, if you learn Torah Shebiksav and you learn Shas Bavli is Iker Talmuda. He says you could call that the Iker of Torah Shebal Peh, and if you learn Shas Bavli and Torah Shebiksav, you could be Yoitza. That's the minimum requirement to be yotzei the mitzvah chiyuvis lilmoid kol HaTorah kula. Now the Rishiva Zatzal says, you can't possibly know it. You're not going to know Shas by learning a blot a day, Gemara Rashi, or maybe even Gemara without Rashi, and knocking off a blot every day. You're not going to know Shas. But the Rishiva Zatzal says, since you're learning a cycle, and you're learning a blot every day, and in the cycle there's built-in chazara, because after 7.5 years, you're going to learn it again. And then, Mirz Hashem, after another 7.5 years, you're going to learn it again. So you're always being oisik in it. The Rishiva Tzal says that's minimal requirements, and you could be yoytze the mitzvah chiyuvis lilmaid kol HaTorah kula by doing that. Fascinating. There's also a mitzvah say lilmaid Torah kol yom. You have to learn every day. But that the Rambam says you could be yoytze minimal requirements by kriyas shema shel shachris and kriyas shema shel arvis. You say kriyas shema in the morning. You say kriyas shema at night. You could be yoytze the mitzvah say lilmaid Torah kol yom. But very fascinating. Mitzvah chiyuvis lilmaid kol HaTorah kula. Nachzor li'inyanenu. So the Mishnah Berurah said here, Nistapakti, Lefi Mashi Yedu Das Agra, the mitzvah lecha matzah kol shivas yimei Pesach. If there's a mitzvah, if the Gra says that every time you eat matzah on Pesach, you're being mekayim a mitzvah kiyumis for the entirety of Pesach, kepashte dekra, which is the simple understanding of the pasuk when the pasuk speaks about matzah, where it says shivas yamim toiklu matzos. For 7 days you shall eat matzah. So how can you tell me there's no mitzvah? It seems that there's a mitzvah. That's the pashtus of the pasuk. So the Gra says, yeah, every time you wash and you eat matzah on Pesach, you're being yoytze mitzvah. Elo the mitzvah say, and it's just that the mitzvah chiyuvis, the obligation to eat matzah, hu rak ba'erev, is only on the first night of Pesach. Ma she'en ken achar hu rak mitzvah ba'alma. And after that, it's only a mitzvah kiyumis, right? That's by Pesach. Efsher, it's possible, says the Chavetz Chaim, to hu adin hacha, that the same thing would apply to Sukkot. Gzera shavat tezvav tezvav. Meaning, mitzvah lechatchila, lechol pas kol shivas yamim. There's a mitzvah lechatchila, meaning a mitzvah kiyumis there is, to eat pas in the Sukkah, all 7 days of Sukkot, or levarach leishay b'Sukkah, and to make a leishay b'Sukkah. So what the Chavetz Chaim seems to be saying, his doubt is, when you come from the mechaber, so it sounds like there's a mitzvah to eat a kezayis pas in the Sukkah on the first night of Sukkot. The rest of Sukkot, you're not mechuyev to eat in the Sukkah at all. Right? Like you said, you want to be a vegan, you want to eat fruits and vegetables for the rest of Yom Tov, fine, you'll eat fruits and vegetables for the rest of Yom Tov. Sudas Shabbos and Sudas Yom Tov, you'll eat an achilas arai of pas, you'll eat less than a kezayis, you don't have to go into the Sukkah. You want to be kaveh suda, okay, kaveh suda, you have to eat it in the Sukkah. But who says you get a mitzvah? Maybe you don't get a mitzvah, you're just not allowed to eat outside of the Sukkah. But if you eat in the Sukkah, who says you're getting a mitzvah? Maybe you're not getting a mitzvah. Or, says the Chavetz Chaim, nistapakti, I have this suffix. Is that the way it works? Or, we make this comparison to Pesach, and just like on Pesach, the Gra says every time you wash and you eat matzah for the entirety of Pesach, you get a mitzvah. Maybe on Sukkot, every time you kaveh suda and you eat in the Sukkah, you're getting a mitzvah. And the Chavetz Chaim says this is a suffix. Nistapakti, I don't know. Problem is that this Mishnah Berurah is a pella. Whoops, sorry about that. This Mishnah Berurah is a pella. The reason this Mishnah Berurah is a pella is because let's go back to Siman Tov Reish Lamed Tes Sif Aleph on Kuf Gimel Lamed Aleph, where the Mechaber says, Keitzad mitzvahs yeshiva b'sukkah. What is the mitzvah of yeshiva b'sukkah? Says the Mechaber, Sheyiyeh oichel v'shoyse, you should eat and drink, v'yoshed, and sleep, u'metayel, and relax, v'dar b'sukkah, and live in your sukkah, kol shivas yamim, all 7 days, bein bayom, u'bein balayla, whether it's by day or whether it's by night, k'derech shehu dar b'beisai b'shayim ois hashana, the way you live in your house the whole year. V'chol shivas yamim ois adam is basically arrive at sukkah sekvah, right? And he's that's it. That's the mitzvah of sukkah, and it's based on it's based on the pasuk of Teshvu came to do. That's what it's based on. So from the Mechaber himself, in the beginning of Siman Tov Reish Lamed Tes, it seems very clear that not only there's a mitzvah when you eat in the sukkah, there's a mitzvah of yeshiva sukkah to live in the sukkah. You go and you spend 2 hours in your sukkah, You go, you sit and you learn in your sukkah for 2 hours on sukkahs. You're being mekayim a mitzvah of yeshiva sukkah. And now he's saying over here, nistapakti. I have a suffix whether or not when you eat you're being mekayim a mitzvah. It's a very peladik Mishnah Berurah. And the poskim speak about it. They speak about this, and they wonder exactly what it is that the Mishnah Berurah is saying over here. To me, it was a pella. I looked at the Dirshu Mishnah Berurah. I was shocked at the Dirshu Mishnah Berurah, which I haven't been using much. I have to tell you, we're calling it a Dirshu shiur, and in a way, I apologize a little bit. I haven't been using the Dirshu. I haven't been speaking much out from the Dirshu, but that's just because. Listen, I don't prepare the shiur to give over Dirshu. I prepare the shiur to give over Mishnah Berurah. And as you can see, the shiurim are going long even without, bringing down much from the Dirshu. But when there is something that piques my curiosity, and there is something that I'm being ma'ayin in, because it is officially like a Dirshu shiur, I always have my Dirshu Mishnah Berurah. See, for full disclosure, I always have my Dirshu Mishnah Berurah here. I looked at the Dirshu and I was very surprised that they didn't bring down anything on this Eis Katan Chav Daled. But one of the suggestions that are made by one of the Mefarshim is that the Chavetz Chaim's suffix, I don't have my picture of the Chavetz Chaim there, I would like to be looking at him now. They say that maybe the suffix of the Chavetz Chaim was whether or not there's a specific mitzvah to eat a meal in the Sukkah. Is that a specific mitzvah that every day over Yom Tov, when you sit down and you eat a meal, when you convey a Suda and you eat a meal in the Sukkah, that is a specific mitzvah of eating a meal in the Sukkah? That was his suffix. Okay. All right, I see it's already a little bit over time, so I guess we're going to stop over here. But I don't think it's going to hold us back because the rest of this page is very, very quick. Okay, let me just mark it off, otherwise I'm going to forget. We're stopping right before the words of the Ramah, 3 lines from the bottom on Kuf Daled Amud Beis. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The Sukkah of limud HaTorah should be made against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshua's Refuos and Parnasa and Shidduchim to all those in need. And we should be zeichet to see the BS Girl Tzedek b'meher v'yomeinu. Amen. Be well.